podcast by George. It's your chance to cut through the clutter and grab a few minutes of news, blues, and interviews that will leave you thinking, by George, I think he's got it. Now here's your host, George A. Clark.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to the podcast by George. We've got some great stuff for you. Headlines of the day, a great story on suffering through 8 years of Barrack Obama, an interview with one of the country's great blues rock and roll guitar players, and your travel forecast. Well, let's get started with what I consider to be one of the biggest changes in America that's responsible for the mess we're in today. This story will also tell you a little bit about me and why I used to be called a redneck hippie. I grew up hard. My hands are soft now, but they didn't used to be. I grew up on a farm where my dad ran a trucking and excavating company and was surrounded by farmers, truck drivers, heavy equipment operators, and most of them were alcoholic. This was back in the 60s and 70s, and it was during some of the most politically tumultuous times in our country's history. And you know what? Those guys never talked about politics that I remember. They never argued in the bars about the news. You know why? Well, to carry on an argument, they'd have to read a newspaper, watch the evening news, or go to the library and get a book. My dad had a guy that was late to work one day, and I heard my dad ask him why he was late. The guy said his wife had twins in the night. One of them died, and he had to take her to the hospital. I ain't lying, folks. That's a true story. That's growing up hard. Now, I doubt that these guys or anybody in their families ever voted, and I don't know that you'd have wanted them to. Don't get me wrong, these guys weren't disengaged. They'd fight, but not about a Senate Intelligence Committee ruling. They didn't slug it out in the bar rooms over the Second Amendment at night. Most folks back then had never heard of the Second Amendment. Hardly anybody had a gun. No one was worried about anybody taking away their gun if they had one. Now, we live in a country that's awash in firearms, and we run around scared to death that a government boogeyman's going to take one away. Which has never happened, by the way. And you know, it was the internet, radio, and cable TV with easy 24/7 access to hate speech that changed everything. Back when I was covering the radio news, there was a fairness doctrine that required reporters to try and get both sides of a story. Ronald Reagan got rid of that. So hello, Rush Limbaugh. Then there used to be a law that prohibited media monopolies. Newt Gingrich got rid of that. Hello, Fox News. It's metastasized into what we have today. I tell people, politics used to be a parlor game for the best and brightest. It's become a computer game for the worst and weak-minded. All right, that's enough of the soapbox for today. And before we get to our interview with Bob Pace, I've got to read this article sent by a listener that's just too good to pass up, and it dovetails really nicely with our open. It's a guest column written by Terry Carter, who's a resident of Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and this appeared, believe it or not, in the Anderson News in Kentucky. She says, the sentence I've heard repeated most since President Trump's election is, "We suffered under 8 years of Barack Obama." Well, fair enough, she says. Let's take a look. The day Obama took office, the Dow closed at 7,949 points. 8 years later, the Dow had almost tripled, closing at 21,414. In January 2009, General Motors and Chrysler were on the brink of bankruptcy, and their failure, along with their supply chains, would have meant the loss of millions of jobs. Obama pushed through an $80 billion bailout to save the car industry, and the entire $80 billion was paid back with interest. While we remain vulnerable to lone wolf attacks, no foreign terrorist organization has successfully executed a mass attack here since 9/11. Obama ordered the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. He drew down the number of troops from 180,000 in Iraq and Afghanistan to just 15,000 and increased funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He launched a program called Opening Doors, which since 2010 has led to a 47% decline in the number of homeless veterans. He set a record 73 straight months of private sector job growth. And due to Obama's regulatory policies, greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 12%. Production of renewable energy more than doubled, and our dependence on foreign oil was cut in half. He signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act, making it easier for women to sue employers for unequal pay. His Omnibus Public Lands Management Act designated more than 2 million acres as wilderness, creating thousands of miles of trails and protecting over 1,000 miles of rivers. He reduced the federal deficit from 9.8% of GDP in 2009 to 3.2% in 2016. And for all the inadequacies of the Affordable Care Act, we forget that before the ACA, you could be denied coverage for a pre-existing condition, and kids could not stay on their parents' policies up to age 26. He approved a $14.5 billion system to rebuild the levees in New Orleans. All this, even as our own Mitch McConnell famously asserted that his singular mission would be to block anything President Obama tried to do. While Obama failed in his campaign pledge to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay, that prison's population decreased from 242 to around 50. He expanded funding for embryonic stem cell research, supporting groundbreaking advancement in areas like spinal injury treatment and cancer. Credit card companies can no longer charge hidden fees or raise interest rates without advance notice. In most years, Obama threw a 4th of July party for military families. He held babies, played games with children, served barbecue, and led the singing of Happy Birthday to his daughter, who was born on July 4th. Welfare spending is down. For every 100 poor families, just 24 receive cash assistance, compared with 64 in 1996. Obama comforted families and communities following more than a dozen mass shootings. After Sandy Hook, he said the majority of those who died today were children, beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old, yet he never took away anyone's guns. He sang Amazing Grace spontaneously at the altar. He was the first president since Eisenhower to serve 2 terms without personal or political scandal. Think about that. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. President Obama was not perfect, she says, but here's the thing. If this is how we suffered for 8 years under Barack Obama, I have only one wish. May we be so fortunate as to suffer 8 more exactly like it. Again, that's from Terry Carter, a resident of Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and a guest columnist for the Anderson News. Okay, so here's a quick look at the headlines of the day. In Washington, a senior Justice Department lawyer says a former British spy told him at a breakfast meeting 2 years ago that Russian intelligence believed that it had Donald Trump, quote, over a barrel. According to multiple people familiar with that encounter, the lawyer, Bruce Orr, also says he learned that a Trump campaign aide had met with higher-level Russian officials than the aide had acknowledged, the people said. The previously unreported details of the July 30th, 2016 breakfast with Christopher Steele, which Orr described to lawmakers this week in a private interview, reveal an exchange of potentially explosive information about Trump between 2 men the president has relentlessly sought to discredit. Also in Washington, President Donald Trump nodded with approval at the suggestion of a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to a court filing Friday night that seeks leniency for a former campaign aide who lied to the FBI. Lawyers for George Papadopoulos are seeking probation, saying the foreign policy advisor misled agents during a January 2017 interview not to harm an investigation, but rather to save his professional aspirations. So now, as promised, our interview with Iowa Blues Hall of Fame and Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member Bob Pace. Bob and the Dangerous Blues Band, they play every Friday afternoon out at the Gas Lamp as part of the work release party. It's a great time, and we went out there to have a little conversation with Bob. So here we are at our home away from home, the Gas Lamp, getting ready for the Friday afternoon work release party with your friend of mine, Bob Pace. And promised we were going to bring Bob onto the show and talk a little bit about his life and his music. A couple of minutes worth, anyway.
My life sucks.
Yeah.
That's why I play the blues.
Yeah. Now, so tell us about then. Everybody, the first question always is, how did you get started? What got you into music, and how did you begin?
I think people are born to certain things in life. I can't, as I like to say to a lot of my friends, I can't operate a toaster on a good day. But I seemed to have an affinity for music early on. I was in old choirs when I was in elementary school. Of course, I got beat up over that. I took up drums early on in a marching band, and then somewhere around the time, I think it was '64, the Beatles hit the U.S. I saw them on stage. I saw Ringo doing his thing, and I'm like, oh, that's for me. Well, we were kind of east side, slightly poor. lower middle class, and we didn't want for anything, but I couldn't get a drum set. But my mom for Christmas bought me a $30 Kmart. Don't laugh, kids, you had one too. Kmart classical guitar, and for 3 years I did nothing but 3 chords. I only knew 3 chords for 3 years. That's a chord a year. And strangely enough, my parents were drinking a lot back in those days. And then somewhere around that 3rd year, I convinced them through some paper route money that I had and their money to get me an electric guitar. And then they really started imbibing. And I got better very slowly. I don't think I was a natural talent, but I worked hard. I was very tenacious.
But everybody thinks now when they see you that you're the ultimate guitar slinger, and they think of you as a guitar guy, but you've played about everything at one time or another.
I've always had a real hunger to learn about every instrument I could possibly play. I want to know what it feels like to have a sore lip from playing the saxophone, which I can't play, or calluses from playing drums and being tired, your arms tired. I wanted to be inside of that and feel what those guys felt like. Like when they feel, how do they feel when they're playing guitar? You get calluses, they rip off, you still got to play that night. I just wanted those feelings. I wanted to get really deep inside of it. And so I play, pretty much most stringed instruments. I'm a really crappy fiddle player, but I can play enough to eventually I play a little bit. But mostly it's got strings on it, I can get a tune out of it. Mandolin, ukulele, guitar, lap steel guitar, all that kind of stuff.
And your personal voice, you sing.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not a big fan. Fortunately, I seem to be in the minority.
Now, as far as your playing is concerned, at this point in our lives, as we get on here a little bit, are you improving? Do you learn all the time, or is it just a matter of now moving in between the styles?
I work hard. I mean, I really practice a lot. I'm fortunate to be semi-retired, and I can take some time out and practice quite a bit. And it's a passion for me still. The day I stop practicing is the day I'll probably retire for real, because there's no hunger left while I do it.
Well, we're going to have you and the music on the podcast a lot. I want to talk a little bit about the one song that we're going to play today. It's
How
an
much
original.
does that pay, by the way?
Right now, it's what you're used to.
Waiting for the check.
Yeah. It's union wage.
All right.
Good-Lookin' Older Women. I'm a big fan of that song. I love it. Tell us a little bit about that particular tune. That's what we're going to hear today.
I was drinking, and I wrote that song. Somehow, that phrase came to mind. I wasn't watching TV or anything. I was just sitting there drinking and probably reading a book or listening to music, and I just, older women, good-looking older women, good-looking younger women. No, that's creepy. I'm 63. Good-looking older women. And Merle Travis once said, the great old fingerstyle guitar player, big influence on Chet Atkins. Merle Travis once said, if you have a song title, you can write a song, because after that, everything comes together. If I want to write about cappuccino, you find words that rhyme with it. Encino, frappuccino, Encino, I already said that one. You big old Mino, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you can write a song around anything. That's what rappers basically do, and they're so quick at it. I'm not a big fan of rap, but I'm a fan of the quickness it takes for them to freestyle something out there and just slam it down like that.
If it flows, it goes.
Yeah.
All right, so let's give it a listen. This is a Good-Looking Older Women live at the Gas. That's Good-Looking Older Women from Bob Pace and the Dangerous Blues Band. Man, that's a great song, and it's targeted at the largest demographic in America. Gals from the baby boomer generation, that's your song. Before we get out of here today, it's time to go to the forecast. And like I always say, don't think weather, think climate. Here's the forecast nationwide today. Showers and storms will be a dividing line between east and west thanks to a strong frontal system. Showers and storms will stretch from the northern plains and upper Mississippi Valley through the southern plains and Gulf Coast. Highs will reach the cooler low to mid 70s in the northern tier, while the central plains through the Gulf Coast heat up into the upper 80s and mid 90s. Other than a few showers and storms interrupting the afternoon, the Tennessee Valley through the northeastern neighborhoods will have a mostly quiet Sunday. However, the heat and humidity won't give up, and highs will reach the low to mid 80s. And don't bother doing your hair if you're spending the day in the southeastern United States. More showers and thunderstorms will be the theme for the day. Highs will be very hot there in the 90s. And thanks to a wide-spreading high pressure, much of the western U.S. will have sunshine. Other than a few showers in the southwest higher elevations, Sunday will be nice and quiet. Highs will, however, persist into the mid to upper 90s from southern California through the southwest and central basin, while more tolerable mercury levels will be in the 70s and lower 80s. That's it. We're out of time. Bygone. See you later. Be careful. Look out, duck. Don't hurt yourself. We'll do this all over again very soon. Watch for a podcast near you. By George.